The neck of this t-shirt is designed to slip over your baby's delicate head. It is hip length and can be made with long or short sleeves. It's from size 0 to 2 years, but I'm sure you could make 4 years by adjusting a 4-year-old t-shirt pattern. Pattern pieces you need for this t-shirt: the easy neck t-shirt front on the fold, back on the fold, and the t-shirt sleeve 2 on the straight grain. Cutting out your easy neck t-shirt, on the fold you put your front and your back, cut it out quite closely to the curved neck and armholes, and make sure you put in your markings for front and shoulder and back. And for your sleeves, 2 on the straight grain, pin them down, cut them out closely to the edge of the pattern piece, especially on the curved head of the sleeve, and make sure you put in the front, the shoulders and the back. All these markings are important for the easy neck t-shirt so that it all lines up nicely. And you also need to cut out some bias binding, so on a 45-degree angle cut out a strip about 4 centimeters wide to use on the neck edge. Okay, the neck opening. We've got all our pattern pieces here. We've got the binding for the neck. You can see you don't need too much. So the first thing you've got to do is stay stitch the neck. Have a look at the glossary for that. It's your straight stitch on the longest length, so it's a really wide stitch. And that helps it keep in shape and, if necessary, to gather it, which I've never had to do. So you've got your front or back stay stitched, so you've got to do both of them, and then you're going to pin your bias binding to it. Start at one shoulder, and what I do is I give the fabric that's the bias binding a little stretch. It's not huge, it's just kind of like you stretch it but not to its utmost stretch, and then pin it down. I kind of like have about 3 centimeters of the binding, give a little stretch, pin it down. Another 3 centimeters of binding, give it a stretch, pin it down. There's a little bit of gathering in between, but once you sew it, you'll actually see it kind of bunches up a little bit, but when you iron it, press it, it actually flattens out really nicely. And it's just such an easy skill is to add bias binding. You just have to have a bit of practice, and once you've had it, you want to bind everything. Okay, so because it's a curved seam and it's on knit fabric, we're using zigzag, 3mm long, 3mm wide, and because it's that curved seam, just take it slowly. So you're only stretching the bias binding strip, you're not stretching the t-shirt, and just take your time sewing it. Trim your threads when you're finished, and at this point you can actually take out that stay stitch thread, you don't need it anymore. And now you want to clip the neckline so that when you've got your bias binding it sits nicely. Every 1 to 2 centimeters just to the stitching line, no further, and trim off the ends of the bias binding. So the next step we've got to do is we're going to fold the bias binding over that seam. So what you end up with is kind of like a little bit of fabric, only about, I think it's about 1 centimeter, because you've sewn your seam 1 centimeter from the edge. So your bias binding bind is only 1 centimeter wide. Any wider and it looks a bit odd, any smaller and it's a bit hard to work with. So fold it over and pin it up. Once it's pinned, now you can sew this down with zigzag, the running stitch or the twin needle from the right side. Again, I prefer the twin needle. The running stitch looks quite cute, but it's a little bit hard to trim, and the zigzag's okay. I definitely would like to say that if you can get hold of twin needles and use them, you won't turn back. They're just the greatest thing. So once you've sewn that, trim off the binding that's left over in the direction that the pattern piece was going, and trim the back of the binding fabric without cutting through to the main body of the t-shirt. Just take your time with that. Okay, so we're onto the shoulders. Press the binding from the wrong side, and what you're going to do is you're going to place down the front with the wrong side down on your table, and then you lay your back pattern piece with the wrong side down, overlapping the front, so that the back comes over the front and the front's going under the back. Pin at the markings, and what you're going to do is stay stitch it in place, so that's your longest stitch on straight stitch. Hold it down so when you're pinning on and sewing on your sleeve nothing moves around, and it keeps those shoulders together. Armhole seams. First of all, you have to sew 2 rows of gathering to be able to fit the sleeve into the t-shirt body. You do that with stay stitch, and your 2 rows are only a couple of millimetres apart, and try and have them within about 1 centimetre of the edge of the fabric. Lay your pattern piece down. You've got a shoulder marking, match it up with a shoulder marking on the t-shirt, a front marking, make sure you've got your right side facing the other body of the t-shirt, and match all those markings and pin it. And what you do is you gather the 2 gathering lines if you need to. It's not much, it actually doesn't gather at a huge amount. You certainly don't see little tucks on the other side when it's sewn up, it's just fitting it in. We're going to sew that with zigzag stitch. Take our time because it's a curved seam, and when we're finished we're going to clip the seam at the curved part so that it sits nicely, and press it towards the sleeve. And we're going to do the same with the other sleeve on the other side of the t-shirt. You've actually done all the hard work. The binding was the hardest part of this t-shirt, and the rest's quite simple. So you can either press now or press after the sleeve hem. Sleeve hems. Okay, we're going to actually hem the sleeve before. We can do it 2 ways. We can hem it before we put it onto the shirt, or we can hem it on the shirt. Fold the hem of the sleeve to the wrong side 1.5 centimetres and pin in place, and sew it, top stitch it with the same top stitching method you did for the neck, so you've got that continuity on the whole t-shirt. If you've used twin needle, you'll need to trim away the excess fabric. Make sure you're cutting your threads all the way along so things are nice and tidy. And we're going to press, in this instance, both the sleeve head, the armhole seam, and the sleeve hem. So we're pressing the hem towards the body. Just take our time. This is a tailor hem. It's quite good for the nice curved shapes. Side seams. Well, we've done lots of our work already. Because the sleeve hem is already hemmed, we have to make sure that we very carefully pin it so that the edges are even, and we're going to sew from the bottom, the lower edge, up to the sleeve. Match at the side seams at the armhole edge. So we're sewing it with zigzag, back stitch to begin. Take our time. When you get up to the bulky armhole seam, just take your time through that, and be careful that you've got both hems of the sleeve lined up together. If you've made an error and the hem isn't even, what you can do is undo it up to the armhole seam and repin it. Try again. If you're not getting any joy, start at the hem end and sew it towards the armhole seam. Sometimes you get a better job. And what you need to do is the seam that you've got at your hem of your sleeve, you need to tack that down towards the back of the sleeve, back of the t-shirt, and all you're doing is pinning it towards the back and sewing it down with just straight stitch, and press your side seam towards the back of the t-shirt. Lower edge hem, we need to cut off a corner at the bottom of the side seam. Fold our hem over 1.5 centimetres to the wrong side and pin it on the right side, and we're ready to sew with our top stitch. So on the right side, sewing with the same top stitch you've used throughout. If you use twin needle, don't forget to trim your edges, and press on the wrong side of your garment.